Welcome everyone, synchronously and asynchronously. So I'm Katrina Whitehead. So some of you may have met me before at some point. But if you don't know me, then I've been working for OCA for about 16 years now, and time flies, and there's been lots of changes over the 16 years, all for the better. And it's been great working with students from, who live down the road to me to places like Nicaragua. So so I find it really fascinating. I teach across a range of programs at OCA. So nice to kind of meet you all, and I look forward to discussing my work. I'm currently studying a PhD in art and design at the University of Huddersfield, and I'm in my 5th year of 6, so I'm studying it part-time. So as well as being a tutor, I totally understand the kind of student role as well, and meeting deadlines and everything. So if you want to ask any questions about time management, I think I've almost nailed it by now. So I've got a very short PowerPoint to go through, which will take about 20 minutes, hopefully. I have already passed on a video to Adam to upload as well. So hopefully you've seen the video. You don't have to have seen it before listening to this talk. You can listen to the video afterwards if you prefer. So I'll share my screen and share, and here's my PowerPoint. So can you all see the, yeah, thank you. So I'm just going to go through my background so that you kind of understand why I'm researching my specific subject area for the PhD and how I've come about that. So going way back, I started studying A-levels at Selby College in North Yorkshire, and under the tutor Roger Sylvester, who's since sadly passed away, but he studied at the Royal College of Art, and his specialism was printmaking. Now I didn't want to do printmaking at the beginning. I actually wanted to do sculpture, and but unfortunately, really sad, the tutor teaching sculpture died in the summer holidays. So and she was only young, and so it becomes September, it was basically, well, you're doing printmaking now. So that was fine, and I was happy with that. And so I did 2 years of printmaking under Roger Sylvester, and it was fantastic. Real drawing skill coming through, and also a little bit of the photography as well. And that's when I started to really think about photography, incorporating that within an art context. And then I went on to do a foundation in art, and that was great, because that's kind of a bit of a unique qualification, really. It doesn't really exist across other disciplines. But so you try a bit of everything, and then you specialize into the area you want to go into. So I tried a bit of everything. One of my faults really is that I like everything, so that can be a problem. But I've learned to embrace that now, only recently. So I really liked graphic design, and the thought of, collage and sticking bits of paper and photography. So that all appealed to me. And when it was time to make the decision after doing a bit of everything, they were like, no, you're not doing that. You're going to do 3D. So because I'd drawn that, we'd gone to Leeds Market, and I'd drawn the ceiling of Leeds Market, which is quite intricate, and they were saying, well, you're really good at drawing perspectives, so that's why we think you need to go down the sculptural route. So I was like, yeah, okay, that's fine. So then I actually went into employment at that point, and I worked for the media, which is quite significant in my research now. So I worked for the media for 19 years. So typing up the news, it's amazing what you learn when you listen to the news every day, 7 days a week, and write and really sort of take it in. So So I'll mention the news again in another slide. But so at that point, after roughly about 15 years, I think it was, I decided that I wanted to go into teaching, which was my original plan when I first started studying. But there were a couple of qualifications, namely maths, that I had to pass. So decided to go back and study maths, and I did photography at night school as well, which I absolutely love. So created a dark room in my bedroom at home, and did it developed prints every weekend. So did that for 2 years as well. And then I, as a mature student, decided to apply to Bretton Hall College, which, if anyone's been to the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, that's where it was based, and it's kind of all derelict now because they just let it go, unfortunately. But it was an amazing place to study sculpture because there's sculpture all around you, and so I absolutely loved going there and studying it full time. And I actually continued to work for the media at night, so I was working till sort of 1 in the morning, doing my night shift, and sometimes till 3 in the morning, and I have to cover for somebody, and then I was traveling to Bretton Hall for my 10 o'clock lectures. So working in the day, but I thrived on it, and it was fantastic because previously, when I was studying printmaking with Roger Sylvester, we'd researched artists like Picasso, for example, and Degas, and I very much was really keen to research more contemporary artists and the Brit artists, which I knew nothing about really. So that was all a revelation. So studying sculpture, I was really studying the Brit artists and installation art. So that was just really fascinating. I was like a sponge, soaking it all up. And I also had a minor module in printmaking. So I was kind of really investigating the craft and the skill of making in 3D. And I did a lot with plaster of Paris, looked at the Boyle family. So it was all, Andy Goldsworthy. So it was all sculpture and the Brit artist installation. And then the next slide. So it's called Chat Room. So it ended up as an installation piece because I was inspired by Pompeii. Hello.
Oh. Karina, sorry, the slide's not moving forward.
Is it moved now?
Yeah. Or is it slowly?
It must be on the next one. It must be on one down the line, hopefully. So I created an installation piece, which was a room. It was in a room, and it was all white. Hopefully I have got it on a slide, but I will share it at some point if it's not there. So I did my degree in fine art sculpture, and then I went on to, I decided that I wanted to go down the printmaking route again. So I went down the printmaking masters. I did a master's in printmaking at Bradford College of Art, and that's where Hockney studied. That was a really interesting program because it taught me about artist books, which I'd never come across before. So I was doing a lot of printmaking, predominantly with photography, but I started to think of the artist books more of kind of sculptural objects. So it really satisfied the 2D and the 3D, and I felt as if they were sort of coming together then through that way. I saw it as an alternative way of exhibiting your work. So although I do know some artists exhibit their photo pages on, in a frame on the wall. So it can be played with quite a bit. There is a link to an interview that I did about one of my artist books, which is on OCA website. I have put the link on this slide, so you'll be able to look at that afterwards in your own leisure if you'd like to. But it was the first book I made, actually, and it was, and this is where the working for the media comes in, because this was about a specific story, which was a school shooting. And so I represented the children as feathers in this instance. So I don't know if you can see the some of the feathers. So it was all done on one etching plate, and you sort of scratch in, and then you print, and then you scratch in a little bit more, and then you print each page, and then your plate is all kind of filled full of marks and scratches and drawings. So I hand drew some feathers, and I incorporated text from newspapers about the story. So the stories that kind of interested me more were unsolved local murder stories, and so sorry, it's all a bit grim, but that seems to be what I'm drawn to when I've been listening to the news for 19 years. So and people who've gone missing and never been found. There's one particular case, and perhaps because I was monitoring the local news as well as the national news, every time somebody had gone missing, they brought the parents back on that child's anniversary or their birthday, and so the whole conversation was repeated again with all the evidence put forward. So so you got to know certain stories, like the Ben Needham case, for example, which some people may know. So there was certain kind of repeated stories throughout my time working for the media, and those are the ones that stuck into my mind more. So my ongoing research after graduation, so I continue to research these books. I bumped into somebody, funnily enough, after my master's who was a student as well, and she started talking to me about self-publishing photo books, and I didn't really know anything about this. So when I saw some examples, I thought, wow, these are brilliant. You know, you can kind of get something that looks like a proper book. So previously I'd been doing all the real craft and the book binding, and the selecting all the paper, so that all by hand, and then this was going all digital. So I'm very much old school. So I've learned kind of pre-internet. I don't even know how I used to find exhibitions in the kind of olden days when you didn't have the internet. It was all word of mouth and poster in the library or something. So so I've had to kind of also learn the digital side of things. So I do love both. So I can adapt to both, absolutely. But I still do think that there's a certain amount of craft with non-digital artwork. And from interviews that I've done and listened to, there's almost a sense of, well, if you haven't kind of slaved away at something and put the hours in, then it's not proper art. And maybe that's an interesting question to debate. So the digital, it certainly wasn't quick for me because I was learning it as a new skill. I think I eventually got down to making a book in 2 days, and I don't think I could do it any quicker than that. And that involves a lot of preparation in advance. So it's not about speed and how fast you can do something and churn it out. Still try to treat it as a piece of craft with the selection of images I chose for each book. And then I started to get commissions from people, probably because I was discussing these books with them, maybe showed them a couple. I don't know. I certainly wasn't doing it as a kind of sales thing. But people that I worked with, say member of staff was leaving, for example. So the idea was mooted to have a book made of everything. So it was a real collaborative event, and that I really liked that. So so everyone had a deadline to work to, and I knew that worst case scenario I needed sort of 2 days, but everyone had enough time to kind of hand over an image or write something for that particular person that was leaving, and then it was my job to kind of collate all these images and text and put it all together and come up with a book cover. So it's almost like curating, in a way, curating a book like you would an exhibition, and looking at sequencing. So that was something that really interested me, and I did a few commissions for people. And then I think the collaboration got really huge at this point. Not sure that I would collaborate on this scale ever again. It was a massive undertaking, and we did a 4D projection. So if you can see on the screen, there's a building on the right. That's where I worked at Batley School of Art in Dewsbury, West Yorkshire. And then on the left, you can see, well, there's actually 4 projectors. In total, there was 6 projectors. So one on top of the other in pairs, and they're all on scaffolding. And so I'd seen I'd actually been doing a lecture to fashion students about technology in fashion. And I think there's a picture there. There was a video that we looked at by Ralph Lauren, and the link is on there on YouTube if you want to have a look afterwards. So he did a fashion show on a building in London, and it was called 4D because it had, thought about your 4 senses, so your sight and the sound. There was music, and there was also smell at one point because he had perfume bottles on the build projected onto the building, and apparently they were spraying the perfume onto the audience. So this really kind of interested me, how you could use technology to create something absolutely fantastic, and I wanted to have a go at that. So I didn't have any knowledge about doing a projection, didn't really know anyone that had as well. And then I went around some staff and like, oh, do you think we could do this? And they were like, no, that probably cost Ralph about £100,000, to do that. We haven't got the budget. So I kind of investigated a little bit more and thought, well, and then we found a projection company that were in Manchester, but they'd projected all around the world. And they were really interested in working with us and gave us a massive discount. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I was able to kind of get this done. So I was able to get a small budget together, work with the projection company, work with the tutors and the students. And that was really important because it was kind of for the students and about the students, and about their work. So I worked with various departments. So there's the building in real life. So the scaffolding was erected on this field that you can see in the foreground, and it had to be done at a certain time of night. So we could all see it. It had to be in the dark, basically, but not too late. So I worked out all the sunset and sunrise times and figured it, and it was actually fell on a leap year night. So February the 29th at about 7 o'clock in the evening. So there was enough time for everyone to kind of go home, have some tea, and then come back and see the projection, or it wasn't too late that they couldn't just stay. So we had an exhibition of, it was about the history of the building, which used to be an old grammar school. So we had an exhibition on the left-hand side of school caps and reports and the school bell and everything. And then, and it was about the contemporary work that students were doing in the studios. So I had a student who was into 3D modeling and used Blender, which is a free software if you're interested in making kind of digital sculpture. So he mapped out the building, got all the blueprints, got the measurements and everything. And then we projected old school photos onto the building. I've just got some images that I'm very quickly flicking through. We worked with the performance artists as well. So the students who studied dance and costume students, they made a costume for the dancer, and she spoke as well. So it had all the sound. The music was the music students, they designed the music. And we had photography students painting with light, and sculpture students, graphic design. So they were all portrayed. We had moving image. It was 11 minutes long, the movie, in the end. We weren't allowed to practice with it on the building because there just wasn't the capacity. So you hired the projectors for one night only. So they were put in place the day before. And then you didn't have any time at all. And we did have a bit of last minute stress because we needed to match up the sound to the actual moving image. So we had to get somebody else on board very quickly to do that. So even on the day of the projection, it was all very scary. But anyway, it was all fine in the end, and we played it. We had models on a catwalk. We'd got some kit that was lent to us from ITV, the news. So they had some dollies and tracking. So we put that down in the studio, and we had ceramics. We had images of the people in Dewsbury Town Centre. They were all projected massively onto the walls. So that was a huge undertaking, and you can see the video on that link there if you want to watch that afterwards. So it was absolutely amazing to work with so many people on a huge collaborative project. And so I do recommend that even if you work with just one person, it can be really beneficial to getting work done as well, and it more interesting. We only had a few months, so from start to finish, I think we sort of started thinking about it in September, and then it was February, and we had all the other things going on as well. So it was a very tight time scale, but it does go to show you what you can achieve on a small budget with a lot of people who are willing to help. And I also say, don't take no for an answer. If you ever want to do something that interests you, you know, just if you really have that gut feeling that it could work, then go for it. So that brings me on to my current research. So like I say, I've been studying this 5 years so far. So my deadline is September next year. And I do recommend studying part-time, because I don't think for me it didn't all click into place until about year 4. So when you're studying something in quite a lot of depth, sometimes you do need that kind of thinking time to really understand what you're doing and what you're trying to say and why it's unique. And that's the difficult bit, you know, it's what are you doing that's different to what anyone else has done before, and that can be quite hard. And that, well, with a PhD, it does involve some philosophy surrounding what you're doing and why are you doing it. So it's really good to talk about your work, which is why I've taken this opportunity to speak to you all as well, because it's good practice for me as a student to discuss my work. And so I've focused back on the crime angle and missing people and murders. So that's come to the fore. It didn't when I first started. I just wanted to look at photo books and artist books and publishing, and that was what interested me, and that was just way too broad, and particularly within the time scale as well. So I researched contemporary non-fiction. So, and funnily enough, that was through speaking to somebody at one of the writing tutors at OCA. We had a discussion about creative non-fiction, and there's not that much that's been written about it specifically, and certainly no one's really approached it from an art and design background either. So this is where your ideas can kind of evolve when you're speaking to people and researching and look at the different approaches. So although it may have been studied a bit within the literature discipline, coming at it from a kind of printmaking, sculptural, multidisciplinary background, that has a different kind of effect on what you're researching. So I narrowed down my research fairly quickly. I looked at Edgar Allan Poe, not in the first stages, but I looked at Truman Capote right at the beginning. He wrote a book called In Cold Blood, and that really set me off. I read a few books at the time with creative nonfiction, but that was the one that stuck in my mind. And then when I reflected on why that might be, and then it all slots into place, and it's really good to review your work over different periods of time, because you can see how certain things have influenced you. So this is where it kind of things come back to haunt you. And you're like, oh yes, on my degree I looked at local murders and missing people, and then it's great because you think, oh yeah, actually I have a bit of knowledge about that. So So it might mean that you kind of revisit certain bits and pluck them out, just to sort of refresh your memory, and then you're off on new tangents. So I read loads and loads. I was just, at some points I was reading kind of 3 books at the same time. So I was reading like a book at night, book on the train to work, book in between, breaks. So you find that you're constantly reading and writing notes. And then I was like, oh no, I can't read that type of book on a night because I'm too tired to write notes. So you figure it out along the way, and see what works best for you. So I was then, as a kind of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary artist, I'm starting to pull together writing and photography and art and crime, and then it all kind of fits into place. So my video has already been uploaded to the Padlet if you want to look at the range of books that I was looking at in the beginning stages of my research. And then you start to narrow it down, and there were so many interesting books that I'd read and come across, but then you sadly have to kind of edit some out because they're not quite fitting into your philosophy or your line of questioning. And in particular, I started then, and this is probably in year 4, that I'd looked at Edgar Allan Poe's theory of ratiocination. So looking at crime in a rational way and trying to kind of figure out the story. So ratiocination came into my research, and a little bit of psychogeography as well has come into my research. So that's actually a short course at OCA, and that's when I first heard about psychogeography, and then I heard about it in another university as well, and there was a conference going on, and I applied to do a conference and do a talk on my work regarding looking at how things have moved on in the town of Huddersfield. So I was really getting an understanding of psychogeography and phenomenology, so being really sensitive to certain areas and feelings and thoughts about a place, combined with Edgar Allan Poe's theory of ratiocination. So some books, I've just got a really small selection here of people that I've come across over the years that have really interested me. So Graham Rawle is the first person that I heard about when I'd studied the books at Masters in Printmaking level. And I've since met him a few times, and he's such a lovely person to speak to about his work. He does do talks. You should get him at OCA. It's really interesting. So Woman's World was the first book that I came across that explored these kind of the way of manipulating text and image. So he spent 5 years creating this one book, and he basically had women's magazines from the 1960s, because he'd remembered as a child his mum reading women's magazines, and so he'd collected and cut them all up, so that it's, I don't know if he actually counted these, but around 40,000 fragments of text. So he actually created a story, a fictional story about a woman who and her life, and created it in a really beautiful way using this kind of collage technique. So I found this really fascinating, and Graham's written other books as well, and I've collected quite a few of them over the years. So he was the first person that I came across. He's now, if you look on his website, he's now creating this book into a film using the same collage techniques. And you can see, if you follow him on Instagram, he puts up posts as well every now and again. So he's he's looking into specific kind of words and comments from old black and white movies and piecing them all together to create a film. Next one is Sophie Calle, who's probably my favorite actually over all the time. When I first researched her work about 30 years ago, I looked at it from a photographic perspective, and I thought it was fine and interesting. But I've since revisited her work, looking at it from the artist book, photo book, creative writing perspective. And it's become a lot more meaningful to me and my own work and how she works. And this is a section of her collaborating with an author, Paul Auster. And there's a real play with fact and fiction with her work and his as well. And then I did a sort of really small conference online. So I did an exhibition of all the books that I'd collected that were specific to crime. And then I did a talk on crime photo novel with a lecturer who studied and taught English language and literature, and also a crime psychologist as well. So again, sort of uniting those three disciplines and bringing it to a different audience. So I was looking specifically then at the creative writing, the crime photography, looking at forensic photography, the sort of scientific aspect, looking at the philosophy of horror and semiotics, and looking at the creative writing with non-fiction and new journalism from the 1960s. Here's just an example of In Cold Blood from Truman Capote. So he interviewed two murderers who'd randomly killed a family of four for not much money. And so there's an interesting play between the text, the way he's written it makes it sound like it's all fictional, but it's all true. Just very quickly going through these. Bruges la Mort by Georges Rodenbach. That's supposed to be the first crime novel with photographs. So they're not the author's photographs, they're from a stock photography agency taken around Bruges to bring the story to life. And Alfred Hitchcock also based one of his stories on that one. Dennis Wheatley is probably my favorite out of all of them for his crime novels, and they contain all evidence, and they're really old. They're from the 1930s, and he only made 4 of these type of novels, but they're also a game. But he wanted them to look more like a book because he wanted them in the kind of book section of the shop, not in the game section of the shop, but they are a game. So they've got all the evidence there. So they've got all handwritten letters and, you know, a stub of a cigarette or a ring, you know, they're just random pieces of evidence. And then the who done it. So that's all sealed at the back of the book. You've got to break the seal, but you're only allowed to do that once you think you've sussed out who the murderer was. So it's great fun, and I really love that one. And then yes, this one's called S. And this is a really fascinating book. It's by, again, a collaboration between J.J. Abrams, who's a film director, and Doug Dorst, who's an author. So this book is really hard to read because it's got your main story that you can see there, which is Type, Ship of Theseus. And then it's got footnotes in as well. Sorry, it keeps flicking. So there's little footnotes in at the bottom of almost every page, which almost forms another story. And then you've got these two people that are handwriting in notes and commenting, and it's in the format of a library book. And what you have to imagine is one person's writing a note about the story, and then they're putting it back in the library, and then the other person's getting it out the library and putting their point of view on. And there's all evidence enclosed in the book, like photographs, postcards, serviettes that have been written on. It's absolutely fabulous. So I do recommend you get this book if you like image and text. And that interactive element as well is what I really liked. I like to get the postcard out, have a look at it, see what's written on the back. And so yeah, so I was reading, how do you read this sort of book? So sometimes a lot of people are like, oh, I just read the Ship of Theseus first, and then I go right back to the beginning and read all the handwritten notes. I can't do it that way. I had to read every bit, the story, then the footnotes, then the handwritten notes, and then look at the images and do it as one. And I didn't mind if it took me like an hour to read, 5 pages. That was fine. So it took me ages to read this book, but it's really fascinating. So yeah, get S. And what's also interesting is because J.J. Abrams is a film director, he did a trailer, so a movie trailer style for the book. And it's really kind of creepy, but it's only short. And there are loads of people on the forums like, oh, when's the film coming out? And they didn't really appreciate that it was actually a trailer for a book. So look at the trailer as well. Oh, that's another one by Graham Rawle. So he's amateur photographer. So if you do like collage, and that's also got things that you pick out, it's got an envelope at the back. And so, you can kind of have a bit more of an interaction with that one. And then that led me on to Orhan Pamuk and the Museum of Innocence. So he's won awards for his writing, and I'd not come across him before, but I'd read a journal by a lecturer who was talking about interactive books and objects, and that kind of connected me to this book. So the Museum of Innocence, it's only got that photo on the front cover, it hasn't got any images in it. It's a really lovely story, and I'm not going to tell you about it, but I will say that he steals, the main character steals objects from his girlfriend's house. But then what he's done, Orhan Pamuk, is he bought a building in Istanbul. He's from Istanbul, so he bought one of the buildings there. It was really run down, and turned it into a museum. So each of the vitrines, he's collected all these objects over the years from flea markets in Istanbul, and he's put them in the vitrines, and there are sort of chapters of each book. And I do hope to go there as part of my research, because I really love this kind of story. I think it's an amazing story and an amazing concept, and it's not one that I've really come across. I've come across a few little things similar to this, but something like this is really hard to find and define. But yeah, if you're into nostalgia as well, and making connections with objects, then I recommend looking into this museum, the Museum of Innocence. And there is a book that goes alongside, so you can see that double page spread at the bottom there with all the black and white photos. That's kind of like a catalogue, but also like behind the scenes to his making of the museum. So I do recommend that book as well. That's called The Innocence of Objects, that book that relates to his background research. I think this might be the final book, Red-Headed Peckerwood by Christian Patterson. So there are a few letters and postcards in this book, so a little element of interactiveness, but it's based on a true crime story where a couple went on a crime spree, murdering lots of people, innocent people, as they journeyed and they eloped together. And this photographer revisited and did the journey that he did, that they did, and he almost recreated it through their eyes in a way. And he did actually come across, weirdly, bits of evidence that were left behind from certain crime scenes that hadn't been picked up from years ago. I think it was done in the 1960s. So he's kind of recreated a story based on a true story, and done it through his own vision of this photo novel called Red-Headed Peckerwood. And the final slide that's one of my own images. So going back to Edgar Allan Poe, so he wrote a story about a girl called Mary Rogers, and it's a true story, but he called it The Mystery of Marie Roget. So he changed her name and set it in Paris. It was originally set in New York. So Edgar Allan Poe, it was the only story he wrote that was largely based on a true story. And I'll just stop sharing there. So after reading all the kind of crime stories, loads and loads of them, I set upon this one because this one had the most interest for me, and it had the most criticism in a way as well. So people were like, oh, we don't really understand the girl who died. mysteriously. I set upon researching that as the main practice of my own work. So I'm doing that as a photo novel, creative non-fiction novel, and researching archives of newspapers in New York for online. I haven't been there. It's not to say, I don't know if I'll go there yet. I might not. If I can get everything I can online, I will. But if I need to go there, I will also. So I've done a lot of research into this specific story and analysed it. And I also then started to take photos of areas where I knew that people had died or had been murdered. And so I set about trekking around certain locations. I started to use infrared photography, so that's used by forensic photographers. So there's certain things that we can't pick up with our own naked eyes, but the camera can pick up a lot of detail. So I'm researching sort of forensic photography techniques and doing that through an artistic practice. And I'm also working collaboratively just recently with, for example, a costumier who is going to recreate the outfit that Mary Rogers was found in when she died, when she'd been murdered mysteriously. So there will be some installation, it will be an installation piece, and it'll also have a photo book alongside. So sorry, I think I've run over, Adam, the time. I get carried away. So yeah, so you've got to be really passionate about it, about your artwork to kind of carry it out through such a long period of time, as you all know, studying your degrees at OCA. But it is worth it in the end, and it does give you loads and loads of ideas, some of which you have to park. But I promise you, it does all kind of click into place. It reminded me of when I learned to drive, and the driving instructor sort of said, "You'll learn it all, and then one day it'll all just click into place, and you'll know how to drive properly on your own." And I kind of think that with the research, really, all the elements, and it does help if you've studied art before, but it's not. It doesn't matter if you haven't. You know, if you've been doing, I don't know, engineering or something all your life, and now you're doing art, that's fine. But you just need to kind of do as much reading and research as you can, and making as well. So that alongside. So thank you. That's the end of my talk.
Thank you, Katrina. That's a really rich sort of. It's great to get that context for your practice. I think where you started talking about your sort of art education and your earlier projects, specifically the ambition of the building projection. Has it got a title, that project?
It's called Spectacular.
Well, it certainly, that's quite an apt title, because with the building and the architecture and the wealth of collaborative input, I think, you know, it's huge ambition there. And it's great to see that, I guess, the skills and the knowledge you gained at that point in your career is still informing how you maybe collaborate and research to this day, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't set for this particular PhD, I hadn't envisaged or set about collaborating, even though I'd done it before. I kind of thought, oh, well, it's my work, you know, it's all for me to do and learn. And then you kind of you sort of appreciate that, say, for example, somebody like Sophie Calle, she isn't doing it all herself. She knows how to do it, but she's able to kind of say, or work with a graphic designer, for example, to get the best design of her book that it can be. So I think there's a point where you know that you know how to do things. But I'm also working with a book binder who owns his own bindery business, so that he's set up. So I'm working with a graphic designer, I'm working with a costumier, I'm working with the book binder. So I know how to do all these things, but I suppose I'm trying to take it to that professional level now. Which is something that you don't need to do for your degree. You know, even for the PhD, you don't need to have an exhibition in place, but you have to have all that preparation there that when you've done your research and you've written your thesis and it's all kind of published and there, and then on that deadline, then you can go and think about setting up an exhibition of your work. I've tried to do a little bit. I've had some of my work published in a magazine as well. I've tried to talk about it where possible, and I've done other little bits to do with printing or publishing, or and I still go to lots of exhibitions and that. So it is very full on, but it doesn't really feel like work. At the end of the day, when it's busy and it's hard to fit everything in, but I just love it so much. I could do this all the time, and I think that's how you need to be, really, to get you through the years of a hard slog to come out the other side.
The passion can take it with you, right, and push a project forward in lots of ways. So yeah, you've got to be completely in it and involved and completely invested in it as a project, right, especially at PhD level. So it's great. You talked a little bit about interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary practice, and coming from a bit of sculpture background, but then forced into printmaking through circumstances. So it's good to see all of the book format being that sort of object that can encapsulate all those different 2D, three-dimensional processes, can inform your research both visually and contextually. So it seems like a really poignant sort of object that marries really well with all elements of your practice in that respect.
Yeah, I certainly encourage anyone who hasn't perhaps investigated making a book to just have a go. You can do it with scraps of paper that you've got lying around and a bit of thread, and have a go at bookbinding, and just stick in some pictures. Because I think since there's a particular book that I've got called it's called 200 Books. It's by an artist called Keith Smith in America, and he's literally kind of listed all the books he's ever made. And I thought, yeah, I don't know if I'll have 200 books, but I think if I revisited some of my projects that I've done over the years, that I kind of like to make books of the artwork as well. So, maybe after this PhD is finished, or perhaps even alongside in a small way, I'd like to kind of make more books now. So it's really encouraged me to kind of think about what other projects that I could do, and to have this kind of marrying the book with an installation piece as well, with the objects that are maybe mentioned in the book or I come across in the book. In the Edgar Allan Poe story about Mary Rogers, there's a certain point. I'm not going to give the story away at all, so if you haven't read it, it's free to download online. If anyone wants to read it, you can find it. It's only about 5,000 words. But there's a flower in the story that's quite a significant part of it, and so I'm currently investigating, well, how can I portray that flower? Is it a sculptural piece? Is it print? Is it photograph? So there's various ways, and then I'm like, and then so that can be scanned or looked upon as a piece of archive, so that quite easily could be a photograph or a scan that goes in the book. But then how can I have that in an installation exhibition to kind of just bring it to life, really, that object? So it really kind of just keeps your brain thinking of ways, and then you kind of try things out, don't you, and experiment.
I love you were talking a bit about the interactive nature of books that I thought was really interesting. The example you showed where there was it the who done it? You had to pull out the picture at the end to work out who done it.
Yes.
Those old sci-fi novels where you choose a page number to decide the journey through the book, and it was less of a linear A to B journey. You kind of make up the story yourself. So I thought that was really interesting. I guess that connects with installation, which is sort of very interactive. You kind of make the work by being sort of within that environment. So some interesting connections there between installation and the interactive nature of books.
Yeah, I think so. And to just think about sequencing and do you have it linear and there's a start and an end, or do you have lots of layers like the book S, where some people read it from start to finish, and some people kind of then reread it again to look at another piece. You know, I found that quite interesting or really challenging, and I don't think I'm really capable of doing that type of book, not at this stage anyway. But yeah, so they all kind of stick in your mind for certain reasons, but you know, you don't want to copy them. You're just taking the influence from these, and then, you know, through your reading and research, you're coming up with your own ideas and your justification for why you've done the, you know, gone down that route. And for me, I think Orhan Pamuk really kind of made me turn a corner with understanding about the connection with the objects and why you have them, and real objects as well that can relate to.
That museum looks fascinating.
Oh, I know, it's absolutely amazing. It's got audio, and they've got a Facebook page as well. It's got a website, and there's interviews with Orhan Pamuk. There's lots online to see. Unfortunately, I did go to Istanbul a few years ago when it was the capital of culture, but the museum didn't exist at that point. Okay. So I'm going to have to go back now to see it. But yeah, I think that's incredible, really, the amount of work he's done, you know, and he's visited flea markets for decades, and he's collected these interesting objects, and then he's decided what ones to use in his novels, and which ones to edit out. So, you know, there's simple things like, I don't know, there's a particular kind of dog ornament that a lot of people have in Istanbul. So he's collected, you know, loads of those, and they're just really simple things. Or one of the characters in the story smoked cigarettes, so he's collected hundreds of cigarette butts and put them in a vitrine, you know. So so it's just about kind of understanding the story and kind of really bringing it to life.
Yeah, I guess that brings a certain authenticity to the words in the book. If you've got objects that sort of correlate, whether they're genuine or fact and fiction blurring, I guess, which is interesting. Yeah, that's really nice. Linda, have you got any comments? Put you on the spot. You're on mute. Not to put you on the spot, but if you've got anything you want to just chat.
No, there's just lots of interesting leads really to follow and lots of things to look up. It's really interesting because I'm following at very early stages of looking into artist books in my own practice, so it's a very good talk for me.
Yeah, I agree. Lots of interesting. It reminded me of other practitioners that are loosely connected. There's a really interesting TED talk by Ashton Klon. I don't know if you've seen that, where he talks a little bit about, he calls it like blackout poetry, where he goes through old books from like secondhand stores, and the idea is you black out many words, but you leave other words to sort of form in sort of abstract poetry. And in his TED talks, he talks a bit about the history of that idea. When he first did it, he thought he was the first one to come up with it, but then the more he researched, he went back and found lots of artists historically that have been doing something similar, sort of appropriating different text and recycling it into your own language in a way.
Yeah.
So I agree. It was, Katrina, lots of really great information there that we can follow up with.
Great. Hopefully it has helped some people. If anyone wants to email me any questions, feel free, or live chat. I'm usually around
If anyone's watching this after the event, then yeah, please do either comment into the forum or email Katrina directly. That would be great. Yeah, lovely. What's next for you, Katrina? You sound like you're on the final run of the PhD. Are you getting there?
Yeah, I've written a critical journal, which is about 40,000 words now. So I'm trying to edit that down myself at the moment. And the book as well that I'm writing, and I've got loads of photographs, and they won't all go in it, you know. So, you know, it's a case of editing, which I find quite hard because if you've got if you've put all the hours in, and the effort, and you really love doing what you're doing, and then it's really hard to kind of discern what goes in, and you kind of know. So I think that I'll probably do that sort of almost like a portfolio review with one of my supervisors to make sure, because you've got your own emotional connection to your work, but it may not be the best or the most appropriate. So I think it's important to collaborate or get somebody to help you, even if they don't know anything about art. If you just got somebody at home that can kind of say, oh, that one's not quite right, I think that's a really good idea to kind of edit out some of your work and make it slick, in that sense, make it the best that it can be.
Definitely.
Yeah,
definitely really good advice. We've got a lot of students obviously on stage 3 balancing their practice and their research and trying to find sort of strategies to work with both. So that's good advice, really, and being able to juggle those different elements of your practice.
Yeah, you get there in the end, and it's all worth it. So just keep at it.